Want to welcome you for joining us today for the four-part series on how to stop being a target of the toxic boss. You you only know how it feels if you've been through it. If you've never had a toxic boss, you may not necessarily understand exactly what we're talking about. But if you've been through you've been through an experience with a toxic boss, our plan tonight is to help you break the patterns the toxic boss exploits. Because you see, the toxic boss, they just don't find it by accident. They find a pattern and they get drawn to that pattern like a bee gets drawn to nectar. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but it's really, really true that if you have a toxic person in an environment, they'll get drawn to certain types of people. So you are in the right place if you find yourself secretly just doubting things about yourself and your profession. Perhaps it's certain tasks or certain deadlines you were supposed to meet, and you just keep questioning, am I good enough at this? It seems everybody else seems to be, they all seem to be coping and everything seems to be working fine for them. But for me, am I struggling? Or you are that person who you can compose yourself at work. So when you're at work, everything looks fine. Everybody see you as this person who seems to be coping. And then you get home to crash. Or are you the professional who has been promoted? And ever since the promotion started, you find yourself suffering. So if you can relate to any of these three, then you're in the right place. Because these experiences, I know they look different on the outside, but they all come from a very common place. So at the end of this webinar, what we are prepared for you to take away is a tool that will help your body feel safe whenever you're dealing with a horrible manager. A map that will give you eagle's eyes to stop the hijack that often compromises you in those high-stakes situations. And then a system that will help you feel more resilient at work without your mind and body paying the price for it. And so just before we get into the meat of the presentation, I'd just like to introduce my special guest host, Althea, today. Althea is a workforce transformation consultant and executive coach, and I'm so glad to have her join me on the webinar today to help just co-host the program. So continue, let her tell you a bit about herself. So Althea, over to you.
Thank you very much, Wally. Thank you. And thank you again just for having me on this session today and just for being able to join you. And it's a pleasure to co-host with you again. So yes, it's been a while. So as Wally said, I am a workforce transformation consultant and executive coach. And I've worked in corporate for close to 3 years. 20 of those years in the 9 to 5 before stepping out and setting up my own consultancy, very much cross-sector, across investment banking, global creative agencies, higher education like UCL, and the non-profit space as well. I've worked with organizations some of you may have heard of, like BlackRock and the WPP Group, which served multiple agencies like Wonderman. Worked for UCL. I'm actually one of their coaches, external coaches. These UK and Unilever. I just say that because they're all different sectors, and some that you may be familiar with, ones that you may be work in yourself in terms of private or public sector. Also known as the corporate doctor, and I really support early career professionals and senior leadership teams to just understand those hidden drivers of behavior at work, and particularly when you're under pressure. And these are times which can really cause disengagement and cause people to leave. So I really come and support leaders with that retention. And I really, again, just a lot of focus is around lived experience. One of the things I experienced burnt, where I became blind on one side and paralyzed down one side as well due to burnout. So I use that plus lots of strategy and bit of psychological insight as well, and just to help people recognize some of the patterns between beneath their responses. So that is more about me, but yeah, definitely spent a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time looking across multi-generational workforces as well. So thank you again, Wally, for having me join you today.
You're welcome, and you're welcome. And yes, and just to tell you a little bit about me. So my name is also Adewale Ademuwa, and I'm the founder of StressTherapist.net. A licensed consultant psychotherapist, and over the last 30 years, been working with high functioning depression, trauma, personality difficulties, and all forms of anxiety disorders. So I've helped over 1,600 people break through the survival mode problem using my four forces framework. Now, the four forces framework helps people to stop sacrificing themselves just to keep functioning. You know how we spend a lot of time just pushing and pushing and push just for functioning. So the four forces framework gives you the ability to know how to do this in a way that you don't sacrifice your energy, you don't sacrifice your own stamina. So over the next 90 days, I'm running this free pattern breaking room pattern. And the idea here is we are going to be doing like a weekly session where we would teach people, give people an insight into seeing the different patterns that's causing them to break down under different types of difficulties. This time around, we're looking at difficult workplaces. And so over the next 90 days, next 30 days, we're going to be working specifically on difficult bosses. And then now, one of my strongest passions that I find myself doing a lot, working a lot around is I want to create a world where I help people experience personalized emotional care. So that you can actually have personalized emotional care in your pocket, using my knowledge with psychotherapy and AI. So just kind of watch one of these days, you may have a therapist in your pocket. So this is one of the things I'm trying to do. So in terms of the pattern room, just to help people with the strategies that we're going to be covering today, I've set up a WhatsApp group where we will be covering some of those strategies. So I'm going to be giving people some exercises that they will be doing during the week in the WhatsApp group. But that also gives us opportunities to have conversations about the different topics we will touch on each Sunday. So if you haven't sent me your email address and your number, please do so, because that will make it easy for me to start communicating with you. Because what I'm hoping is that you'll get the best out of this series, and this will leave you in a state where you would be able to overcome the problems with your manager. So that's enough about us. I'm moving on then. As a big question, when it comes to dealing with your manager that's difficult, what have you been blaming? Have you been blaming your workload? Have you been blaming your confidence? Have you been blaming your manager or blaming yourself? As interesting, God, we're talking about a toxic manager. How can we talk about a toxic manager and I'm asking the question, have you been blaming your manager? Because the reality is that whilst it may seem that the manager is where the problem is coming from, the problem is way bigger than just the manager. And this is why we're saying toxic people, they can sense, it's almost like they have a spider sense for certain patterns. And the patterns that you don't realize you're giving off, it may be that the pattern is that you're someone who's very empathetic. Like I had a client tell me that she just always wants to help let her manager know what is going on. And because she wants to let her manager know what is going on, anytime something happens, he feels that the manager must know. She runs to the manager to tell the manager, and the manager just slips in some sort of toxic comment that undermines her. Every time she goes to the manager, she just slips in some toxic comment that undermines her. Eventually, we realized that, okay, for this client, she needed to decide, actually, the manager doesn't have to know every single thing. Each time the manager knows something, each time I spend time with the manager, they deplete me. But is the manager the problem here? Or is it the belief that you have to go and tell the manager everything? We'll come back to that in a second. I see some comments. Okay. Yes, I hit record. Okay. Right. So if you've been trying to figure out for years what's wrong, you've probably been blaming one of these things. I don't know, Arthur, do you have any points to make on here?
No, Wally, I'll let you continue and then I'll
Okay.
come in and
Right. So now we talk about the three different relationships. I think you said you wanted to make a point here, Arthur. So the three different relationships that were not necessarily to do with work. So the relationship with yourself, the relationship with mistakes, and relationship with unpredictable authority. To start with the unpredictable authority, because let's say you grew up in a home experience where maybe dad or mom had a tendency to fly off the handle a little bit without necessarily giving you any warning. Or let's say you had a parent who had a tendency to criticize you for every small thing. It could be something as small as, okay, you drop the drink on the table. You start to have this experience where you see authority as this thing, or people who have some sort of authority over you as this thing that is unwielding, this thing that is unpredictable, this thing that can affect you in an unexpected way. So I have this client whose dad used to shout all the time for simple things. It could be they they walked into him watching something on the TV. They made a bit of a noise. He shouts on them. He would beat them so heavily. And this client grew up just fearing all authority figures. So people like his manager becomes a threat. And it became worse if he had a manager who was a little bit strict, because all the manager had to do was shout and it just triggered him and it was back with his dad. So in your experience, what's the relationship you are having in this page as you're looking at it? What's the relationship you are having with work that's not necessarily to do about work itself? And where is that coming from? Out here? I believe you had a comment to make here.
yeah, definitely. And I would also just go on to the relationship with unpredictable authority as well. And I've seen this a lot. Again, being an executive coach, I've seen this a lot, just even in boardrooms and just speaking to people one on one. And as much as like we say unpredictable authority, I think sometimes it's predictably unpredictable. So I find that people, what happens is an individual will go into a meeting, for example, and as soon as they know this particular boss is going to be present, already they're starting to panic. Already they're conjuring up some type of emotion that is causing them to really fret their encounter. And even though it's not necessarily just the two of them in the room, it could be a number of people in the room. And so, they start to already have this discomfort, and then they start to lack their ability. They don't want to speak up in the room, and they don't want to bring new ideas to the table, even though they might have them, for fear. And it could be a number of different fears about this particular person. It could be their status. They've grown up with the idea that hierarchy and somebody who's at a higher level than you should be always respected and not questioned. And that happens a lot from the different cultures that we might come from.
Yeah.
It could well be that actually, because, and again, you've touched slightly on, the background. A lot of it isn't necessarily to do with just that encounter or this particular job. It can come from a time before that. As you said, it could well be somebody who had a similar personality to a parent, a previous boss, a previous person they might have been in a relationship with. And so this now triggers those feelings.
Mm.
And it could well be, and sometimes it is even down to themselves in thinking, okay, maybe I have to really impress this person, but actually I'm not really feeling that I have enough information, or I'm not really feeling good enough. And yes, that does teeter on to imposter syndrome. So there's lots of those feelings that they can have. And sometimes you get to the point where what I've found is they feel relaxed because all of a sudden this boss is not showing um, this unpredictability. And so then they relax and think, oh, this is going to be a good meeting. And then predictably, unpredictable authority comes up, and it actually throws them off course and makes them start to panic and to even shrink into that identity that doesn't really serve them. So
Mm.
that's what we have to kind of like say about that. And again, it's down to the individual rather than the person that they feel threatened by.
Definitely, definitely. And this is very important because when you are being triggered by an unpredictable authority, let's say, for example, sometimes you won't actually realize that's what's triggering you. And if you don't know that this is what's happening, you can find yourself falling into a loop where you start to self-criticize for being triggered as well. So there was another client that I had who found herself in a situation where she went for an interview, right? And as soon as she entered the room to have the interview, one of the interviewers looked like her dad and also had a stern face like her dad. To make matters worse, when he spoke like her dad. And she couldn't understand why she was so shaken. Before entering the interview room, she was already prepared and felt she was confident as soon as she entered the interview room, and that was her experience. It's almost as if she just became a child all of a sudden. All right. And after the interview, she couldn't stop crying. And it's one of the reasons why she decided to come for therapy. So what are we saying here is that there are experiences that has happened that are being projected into the situation that you are in. And unfortunately, a manager, especially if the manager is purposefully toxic, they notice those telltale signs and they start to prey in different such ways on those telltale signs. So that's with the unpredictable authority. So we'll talk a little bit about the relationship you have with yourself. And this one, it's sad. It's sad because let's imagine someone going through some difficult experiences And those difficult experiences has taught you that something about me has been triggering certain people in my life to treat me in difficult ways, in bad ways. And unfortunately, as a child, as growing up as a child, when you have that kind of thinking, you don't question it. So, for example, if your mom constantly tells you that you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong all the time, they never praise you, you're constantly telling you you're doing something wrong, you can find yourself believing that something is wrong with you. There's so many experiences where people start to even believe that they are bad in nature. And because they are bad in nature, that starts to color a lot of the things that they do. You find yourself perhaps even trying to be good to other people, treating people kindly, people pleasing, and just doing things that just makes you more vulnerable. Because the person who gives a lot, who gives themselves a lot, who is that person attracted? That person is attracted to the person who takes a lot. And all you just have to have is a manager who is looking for someone who they can take a lot from. And then you present yourself as someone who can give a lot. The manager just really completely uses you in a way that they're not using anybody else in the team. And you wonder, why only you? Why did they only call you? Why it's just your name that they're calling? But it's because of this pattern that they've seen. So when you find yourself thinking things like, I'm from, am I good enough? Or is something really wrong with me? And unfortunately, there's nothing that has been done to challenge that way of thinking. There's nothing that has been done to balance that way of thinking. Because if you think about it really, is there anybody in this world that is never good enough? I mean, what would you conclude would be the evidence to tell you that someone is not good enough? And as I said that, I was just thinking about Hitler. What? But even Hitler, we can't say he's not good enough because again, we don't know the kind of story of his life. But before I say something that will make people decide not to switch off the screen, after did you want to say something to me?
Yeah, I'll ignore the Hitler comment. And yeah, I think, again, you're right about, things that you've even been taught. I remember speaking to somebody and they're talking about their child, and their child must be about 11 at the child. And they said, oh, this child is always having bad luck. And it's something that they drilled into that child that, yes, anything you do, you have bad luck. It never works out for you. And so this child, I've seen this child now in like their mid-20s, they're still carrying that same weight of, it's not going to work out. Even if I get this job, it's not going to last. I'm not going to get on with the boss. I'm just not going to get on with the work. The people are not going to like me. I'm going to leave eventually because that's what always happens. And so it's something that's kind of like being, drilled into them from an early age. And what I find is that this really, in the workplace, you see this a lot when it comes to feedback. And I always say, yes, you definitely, and before I touch on feedback, it's almost like you enable people's behavior. We do it subconsciously. We can't help it. Um like the boss that you were saying, he sees something in you that he realizes, actually, I can use this to my advantage, and will continue using them because and sometimes you have to think to yourself, we're all individuals and we all have needs. And even as a manager, as a leader, you're going to look for that easy. You're going to want things to be as simple as possible. And if it's somebody who's an absolute walkover, then unfortunately you're going to, but they're forever people pleasing and giving you the results. You're going to lean heavily on that person. And unfortunately, if you're that person and you're not one to push back or say, no, I haven't got capacity for that, it's just going to be a repeated cycle that just keeps going. And again, just in terms of the blaming yourself, again, even when it comes to, I see this a lot. really pan out when it comes to giving feedback or when people are receiving feedback. And they could have done the most amazing bit of work and they have received great feedback and they have one thing. And I used to see this a lot when I used to do lots of 360s. I used to have people used to have the 360 feedback and I used to just kind of like go through it with, and 90% of it could have been amazing. And 10% was, these are the areas that you should improve on. Obviously, we all should have areas that we improve on. But you would take this in such a negative way as a, I knew it, I'm just not good enough. Everybody must be thinking this is the area I need to improve on. Oh, how many times have I made? And they're so hard on themselves. They've not seen 90%, but they've focused on that 10% of negativity and thinking that actually they're doing something wrong. They must always be doing something wrong. And that's not the case. And I'm seeing this as it looks different across generations as well. So this could be like the generations that are above 30s to up to 60s, like the millennials, the Gen X's. But for the new youngest generation, the Gen Zs, they actually are craving that feedback all the time. They don't mind having that negative feedback because they do see it as constructive and they're less likely to blame themselves. However, if you're not giving it to them often enough, then they're thinking, oh, there must be something wrong why they don't want to be giving me feedback. So there's so many different ways where we're constantly blaming ourselves for the behaviors of others towards us. So I just wanted to really add that. And I see that Gail's talked about like negative, I'm sure I just saw a comment about negative
Negative
talk.
self-talk, yes.
Self-talk, yeah. And it's something that happens a lot. And just one more fair way to add, I always say share the word believe. Because when you see the word believe, in the middle of that word is the words LIE, which is lie. And these are the lies that we often tell ourselves. So, we believe, we're constantly having this negative self-talk that we're telling ourselves all these lies. Oh, the boss doesn't like me. It must be because I didn't perform well. It must be because, I didn't hand over. I didn't follow the instruction. And all of these things that we keep telling ourselves. And it's time that we really change for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah. So really, so what we're saying here is that there are certain patterns already that are becoming like a telltale sign. Now, if you think about, if you are a boxer, you get in the boxing ring, you don't want your opponents to see any sort of things, giveaways that you are afraid. Because once they see you're afraid, they think, oh, I can win this, and they come for you, right? So imagine the manager being the boxer, and all these things that you're thinking about yourself starts to give them cues. You may not necessarily see the cues yourself. You may not even realize that it's giving off vibes. But when you are having this sort of thoughts around yourself, it's giving off very strong vibes. And the next one, which is sort of the relationship with mistakes. So if we think about our brain is almost like a muscle. We can never think the brain is like as a muscle. And with any muscle, if you don't use a muscle, what happens? The muscle withers away. And the same way, if you don't focus on things you do very well, and you don't make that like a common occurrence for yourself, your brain will find it a struggle to think about things you do very well. Now, this is even worse in different religions where we are taught to be humble. Don't be big-headed. And because they said don't be big-headed, you'd be humble, it almost feels like if you are to sort of acknowledge your good abilities, your strengths, your achievements, you almost feel like you're doing something wrong. If you have some people actually who feel very guilty to just allow them to themselves to think about this. This is something else that the toxic manager will play on. If the toxic manager notices that you're someone who who struggles to even appreciate yourself, they'll give you reasons to not appreciate yourself. So learning to start to allow yourself to see your good abilities and not focus so much on just the mistakes is a very, very, very important thing. So I just seen that the thing that I say, you see a typo, or you see a typo in an email you give out. I don't know if anybody has ever done that before. You send the email out and then you see the typo. I have this experience a lot. I send WhatsApp messages out, and then as soon as I send it, my mom texts me and says, you left a T out of that. So imagine if every mistake you're making like that, you're sort of picking up the errors, right? If you are not defending yourself, in other words, you don't have like a shield to help to a shield that gives you a sense that you are doing well, then it's going to be hard to deflect the arrows your manager throws at you. In other words, if you haven't spent any energy and time feeding off the positives the wins, the experiences that you've done well in, um, it's almost like you have then opened yourself wide open, because anything anybody else throws at you will come in so fast and so strong, and to be hard to sort of block that away. Now, I'm saying this for a very important reason, because it's a common belief that for me to know whether I'm doing well, I need to be told I'm doing well. I need to be appraised that I'm doing well. And whilst that has some truth to it, if your sense of doing well only lies in other people telling you you're doing well, you fall into a trap where a toxic manager can use. Because guess what they will do? They won't tell you you're doing well. You may be breaking your back for them, but they won't tell you you're doing well. So there's a need for self-validation that has to happen, because that person who's looking for validation externally, that's a strong cue that the toxic manager can capitalize on. Arthur, did you want to make a point on that one?
And then what I'd really add is that, it's really important to see mistakes as lessons rather than see them as, mistakes of evidence. I'm just not doing things well. And, I was even going through something recently, and I just thought to myself, my goodness, how have I found myself back in this position again? And then really had to look at it as a lesson and think to myself, okay, so I was in this situation probably about 20 years ago, probably more times in between, but like significantly about 20 years ago. And just remembering the emotions that I went through at that point, remembering the thoughts that I went through at that point, and had to kind of like say to myself, oh, actually, hold on. Actually, I got over that, the things that I learned, and it's time to really apply them. And sometimes we have to do that instead of being really reactive in every situation and within the workplace. We have to sometimes just stop and think, okay, so what is the lesson that I've just learned? Everything I say, every time you step out of your house, just consider it as a day in the classroom. You're about to learn some knowledge, whether you're doing good or whether or not you're learning a new lesson, as in called a mistake. So it's better to reflect on that and just to really understand on that learning. And yes, you're definitely going to get people not just managers, you're going to get your colleagues who will capitalize on the mistakes you've made to make themselves look good, or to make you do something, to use that as leverage to get you to do something else. But you have to know for yourself, sometimes you just got to pause, just got to step back and just say, oh, hold on. What was the lesson here before I start being really reactive and, people pleasing and doing all the things that are just not going to serve you? What is the lesson that you can learn, and how can you just pause, reflect, and then do something differently? That's what I would say.
Yeah. So thank you. All right. So as we've touched on the unpredictable authority figure, just wanted to kind of highlight this experience. So what we're saying here is that the toxic manager, or even toxic people at work, like Althea says, they're sort of pinpointing different things to know who they can attach to. So I had this client who, she was a hard worker, really hard worker, and she got transferred to a particular team, and the manager was very lovely. He was very nice, treated her really nice. I actually thought she had a jackpot, right? And the manager pulled her closer and just kind of made her his second in command in the team. And she felt, okay, this is going to be something that will work very well. As soon as he made her second in command, he just changed color. Pooh. He became this very horrible person who was unpredictable, who was hard to sort of figure out. He every single thing that she was doing, even when she felt, oh, she's done something good, she goes to him, I've done something good. He picks up something bad, and he just kept on doing that. So I guess what we're harping on really is know that you are not alone in this. If you find yourself in that kind of a cycle, there's something happening. And many other people have actually been in that kind of cycle too. And the good news is today we're going to be looking at different ways of sort of breaking out of actually seeing the thing for what it is. And because if you can't see it properly, if you can't see the patterns clearly, then it's just really hard to kind of break out of it, isn't it? So to help us understand the process of seeing things clearly, I want to ask a question, and I want you to type in the chat box your answers to this. Can a chair be more than a chair? Sounds a bit cryptic, but what do you think? Just one or two answers. Can a chair be more than a chair? What do you think? Can a chair be more than a chair? Can a chair mean more than a chair to a person? Yes, Abigail says. Good, we have some yeses. You have some yeses. Cool. Out there, what do you think? What other things can a chair be that's more than a chair?
That's a good question. I always see a chair as something for resting on, whether you're seated on it, whether you're leaning on it. I mean, you could obviously use chair as a form of defense, but we won't talk about that.
I've done that before, actually.
Especially when we're talking about toxic bosses, we won't keep direct. That, yeah, what I'm thinking about a chair, for me, a chair just represents rest.
Right. So one of the researches that I was really surprised by was they said actually chairs are one of the biggest sources of death. A self-defense barrier. That's true, Abigail. That's what I've used that as self-defense. Definitely, in a particular job that I had to use that as self-defense for a lady that was coming for me in that job. Right. Okay. Well, that's another thing totally. But yeah, this research said a chair is actually one of the biggest causes of death, especially since COVID, because the more you sit, and apparently, the more you sit, the older you grow. And I think for me, for example, my job requires me to sit down quite a lot, but apparently, the more hours you sit, it actually takes years away from you. Now, Abigail says, yes, we lose muscle, right? Now that I've said this you all now think, okay, a chair can actually be dangerous. So this is a chair that perhaps before this, we all thought it was just something we sit down on and we just relax on, or we used to defend ourselves, definitely. But now that I've said this, your relationship with the chair may begin to change. You may find that tomorrow when you're at work, doing your work, and maybe usually you don't do any kind of standing up in a space of 5 hours, and then you're thinking, oh, wow, Adewale says a chair can kill yesterday, so I gotta stand up and do some walking, right? So, so somehow your relationship with the chair has changed because of some kind of experience now you've had with it. Where am I going with this? You see, the relationships we form with different things often determine the impact and stress other things bring into our life. Yeah, chess can be used to exercise too. That's very true. So the relationship we form with things can often inform the way they create problems in our lives. So we've just talked about chair now. Some people may then become extremely stressed about chairs later on because of what we've just said about chairs today. Um, how might that relate to everything we've been talking about all morning around your experience growing up as a child, the sort of belief systems that you formed, and how that has to influence the relationships you are having with yourself, how that starts to influence the relationships you are having with mistakes and with difficult, unpredictable people. This brings us to this map that I want us to kind of see. This is like an eagle's eye view of the problem. So a past experience, a chair. Now, my explanation of a chair now has become a past experience for you now, obviously. And perhaps I've traumatized you with a chair, with the idea of a chair being like a death trap. So the past experience of that creates that kind of relationship. So a relationship, this we call schema. So for example, a phone. The schema for a phone is something that you use for calling friends, or a phone could be something that whenever it rings is bringing some trouble that you don't want to hear, right? So your schema is that relationship you are having with that thing. So past experiences create these schemas, and then these schemas produce the surprising triggers, relationships like we sort of talked about. So it may be something as simple as you went to work today and somebody had cologne on, and cologne was one particular cologne smell was the one your dad used to use. And let's say you didn't have a good relationship with your dad, that smell, just that smell, spoils the whole day. And you're wondering, why am I in a bad mood? Why am I feeling this way? Well, it's because that kind of relationship that has been formed with something has created this surprising trigger and has led to that experience. So unfortunately, this whole thing, these are things that unfortunately the toxic manager, I mean, it becomes almost like the, how do I put it, gift that we're given a toxic manager to say, oh, I'm here to at your mercy. Yeah. So Arthur, you said you wanted to say something about this one here.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the importance of emotional intelligence is quite key in this particular area. For me, I always say emotional intelligence is very much about being less emotional, about how somebody reacts. No, being less emotional about how you react and being more intelligent about how you react to other people's emotional outbursts. And I say this because a lot of the time, someone will say something and it'll be an emotional outburst, and let's say it will trigger a past experience that you've had. And that can then be a domino effect into an outcome that was unnecessary had you have just stopped and paused and thought, oh, hold on, where is this coming from? Sometimes the person that we're reacting to, say this toxic boss, is going through different situations. Again, I'd say, I mean, I know we talk about toxic bosses, and I've experienced many in my time, particularly in the environments of it. I'll come to you in a moment, Gal. Seeing your hand up, and I always also look at them as human as well and think, okay, so what external influences have caused them to behave like how they're behaving right now? Now, they could have low self esteem, they could have issues going on at home, it could be issues coming above them in terms of their boss, how they're being treated, and then it projects onto yourselves, onto us. And so for me, it's very key that we sometimes just step back before we react, because it hits us emotionally. But then when we don't address it, one of the things, and I just want to also say, one of the things I used to do is when my kids were at school, um, I used to always say to them, if someone upset you, don't silence is the best revenge. You know, don't react. But what I didn't do was give them a way to actually have an outlet for it. So therefore, I was causing them to suppress how they were feeling. And so when I say it's one thing to not necessarily react to the person who may have triggered something in you, it's very important that you um have a way of coming back to address it with them. Otherwise, then that, you know, as point three, you've said, for me, that almost has a direct impact on the body. And my direct impact from suppressing everything and people pleasing and so I can do it, even when I was at capacity, ended up with my eyesight, as I said at the beginning of the call, losing my eyesight and becoming paralyzed down one side because I didn't handle it very well. I didn't have this map.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's very important that we address it, and I was kind of homing on this point of sort of addressing it, and it's one of the reasons why I'm producing this map today. Sometimes addressing it may mean that after the event we spend some time exploring, okay, what was going on in here, which is something that we're going to be touching on it a little bit later on. What was going on in here? What happened? What triggered me? Why was I feeling that specific way? Was the behavior of the manager right or justified or wrong, or actually unjustifiable? Right. We actually spend some time processing it. And why are we saying this? Because often what's going to happen for many people is they go through that experience and they're trying to push it away. They're trying to bury it so that they can just move on. Right. And unfortunately, the more you bury, the more you push away. All you just do is you stock up emotional wounds that make you even more sensitive and more sensitive and more sensitive. And after a while, it just becomes a domino, a stack of dominoes that just collides with each other and just creates an defect where your body starts to do things that you feel you're not in control of. So I can see that the number four says like avoid processing and making up blocking processing. So the more you avoid, the more you find that your brain does something very tricky. Because you see, whenever we go through any difficult experience, the brain puts us at a place where we need to address it. It's a bit like when you see something threatening, the brain wants to know if you're safe. So if I put you all in a room now and I put a bucket load of cobras in the room with you, and I say to you, here is a puzzle, just focus on the puzzle. Don't focus on the snake. Whatever you do, don't focus on the snake, right? Chances are that you perhaps won't be able to. And about that, you're not going to kind of listen to me at all. You'll be able to focus on just that. So, hey, Cheslin, great to have you with us. So the blocking of processing is almost like you're telling your brain the cobras are in the room, don't have a look at them. The brain is going to find the cobras eventually and be triggered by the cobras. In other words, that thing, maybe it was just your boss just doing his eye in a very funny way, or somebody else in the room that was maybe like a bully, saying something that made you feel that they were undermining you slightly. but not very obviously, right? Your brain will latch onto these different things. You just find yourself just latching onto things that other people perhaps won't even have noticed, but because you've been blocking that processing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's
I
this.
think Gail,
Sorry.
just before you go
Oh,
on, Wally, I think Gail had a comment that
oh, she had a
make.
comment she was going to make. Okay, Gail, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me? Because I'm not sure if this works.
The volume is not loud.
I was just saying, we talk about emotional intelligence, I'll deal with. What I come to realize is, Stella was a little bit of a big pleaser. Like you said, when work yourself to the bone, one little element, but just magnify. I've come to realize is I'm getting that this is true emotional intelligence. It's generally not a reflection of you. Is that person is struggling with certain things. Maybe they have a perfection. They like things perfect. And because you made that one little error, they're highlighting it. So it's about reflecting that back onto them, recognizing it's not you, it's the issue, but they have an issue. They're probably struggling with like I said, perfectionism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that has helped me personally as a long way when I recognize somebody says something negative, not necessary, because I may have done something to deserve that, but it may be just a reflection.
Yes, I think thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's very important. That it may be other people's own shadows and negative things that they are projecting onto you. And being able to just know that is very important. Yeah, so just kind of talk through the experience of this soldier quickly. So just kind of imagine the soldier before he went to war. As a teenager, he used to party a lot, so he loved a lot of loud noise. But eventually, he went to war, and at war, there's a lot of loud noise as well. Like you said before, the relationship, the traumatic experience changes your relationship with things. So now the soldier, his relationship with loud noise changes because at war, loud noise, it's something that can kill you. There's a bomb, there's a gun. So when the soldier now came back to the UK where there's no more war, he finds himself going through the town and hears the silence of the car backfiring, ba, 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 ba. And eventually just jumped and he'd only to realize that it was just a car backfiring. And he looked around and people were looking at him weird. So the car backfiring, in this case, was a surprising trigger. And unfortunately, there's so many things that someone who may end up being a toxic person for you, there's so many things that they may be doing that become a bit like that car backfiring. So this is the surprising trigger. And also we sort of happening around this particular concept because just like Abigail just said, that person who is picking up on things because they have a perfectionistic thing, that person might trigger you because they criticize in a way that makes you feel very bad. But that criticism may be an issue more because of an experience you've had earlier on growing up or in another job or in another relationship where you got criticized quite a bit. And that becomes a surprising trigger. Yeah. So, and it's the surprising trigger that causes it to be very hard to think clearly where you are in a situation where you are being attacked by somebody or you are being triggered by somebody. Because if you think about it, our emotions our emotion, because I think your brain has an emotional part to it and it has a logical part to it. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience. Somebody made you angry. That's your emotions go higher. But the more angry you get, the more you have this likelihood of reacting in ways that you perhaps won't usually react. And you do things that make you feel bad afterwards. And you think, why did I react that way? Was because your emotions became strong and pushed your logic down. And your logic wasn't in the room to help you react better. Or you find yourself in a situation where you feel anxious about something. I don't know if anybody's ever had this experience. I am an adult, and as much as I know as an adult, I find myself walking down. Maybe I just went to the shop. I decided to go to shop because some of the shops here are open at 11 p.m. So go to shop at 11 p.m. and it's very dark. And then I heard something weird in the shrubs, right? As much as I'm an adult, my emotions get triggered immediately. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking of the worst case. Could it be an animal just jumping at me, or I have all these potential worst case scenarios that come in play? But that's only because I'm in that emotional state. All these irrational ways of thinking about things become strong. So in that emotional state, your logic will fail you. And this is important because if you don't recognize that this is happening, you find yourself feeling very bad about it. You beat yourself up about it. And when you beat yourself up about it, what does that do? That creates more emotions. So if your emotion has already sabotaged your logic, and then beating yourself up about it is sabotaging your logic even more. Now you are in a state where you are more prone to even making more mistakes and to do things in a way that will make the person who is being toxic around you actually have more things they can put their hands on to criticize you. Yes. So it's that's the fight or flight stimuli, definitely.
Give them more ammunition.
You give them more ammunition, exactly. Yeah. Interesting. Exactly. So that's why the hijack happens. And because our brain needs time to process things, if we don't take the time after the event, whatever happens with your manager, whatever happens around your manager, if you don't take the time to stop and process what's going on and reflect on how to start dealing with things differently, or reflect on why you got triggered, how you can manage this trigger differently, if you don't do any work on that, all we're just doing is creating layers and layers of things to make us more emotionally vulnerable to be triggered. And the more these layers pile, the more they seep into our subconscious. In other words, the deeper layers, they've only been there because they're now at a subconscious level and they trigger us without us even realizing that that's what's happening. Out here.
Ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely say on this as well. I think you're spot on. I think what happens is we create these layers and these habits that essentially we now have these layers have developed into habits, and instead of that reflection, time to self-reflect after any particular incident, we just move on. We're so high in our emotional state that we don't stop to pause. And so we then move on to the next thing and then keep going, and then it happens again and we get back into that high state, and then we, you know, just get upset. We have all these negative self-talk thoughts, not even about ourselves, about the other person, and then that passes, and then we move on. And this happens, and this happens from when you're as a child, when you're with your siblings or at school, going through education, right into the first workplace to where you could be now. And so because we're continually doing that, it's the undoing that is going to take time, because behaving in one area of your life is ultimately how you behave in another area of your life. And if you're reactive, not reflective, that's just how you're always going to be across the board. And so when you're in this work, when you're in a workplace and you have somebody come at you and they confront you, and it could even be that they're just giving you feedback, you're already got that combat mindset, like, oh, they've just said something negative, they're attacking me. And so you're not stopping to, again, reflect and say, okay, let me hear, understand, and process what they've said, how I feel about it, why I feel about what they said, why am I having these emotions to what they said. And because when you actually reflected it, oh, actually, it wasn't that bad. And it's almost like when you read an email or you read a text message, and automatically you're so offended by it. You're like, how dare they say? And then a couple of hours or days later, you look at the same email message.
Why was I upset?
Why did I think? And so it's that habit, and that habit of a behavior that we've took upon ourselves that we need to almost reverse.
Exactly. So essentially what we're saying here is that avoidance may feel like it's a protective thing. If this is done to extremes, it's actually now creating layers of problems. So avoidance, suppression, or pushing through. So you see people who are just thinking, okay, I just push through. I'm not feeling strong. I just push through. And I know, for example, I mean, I come from Nigeria, and the normal way of thinking in Nigeria would be emotional things are not real. These are things that people should not. It's just move on with life. You just have to kind of move on, and that's what it is. And unfortunately, you just keep doing that, and it creates strong vulnerabilities, and until you find yourself having a massive breakdown. So this is something kind of just to be aware of. So we've got to train ourselves to be able to see the hijack coming. So I'm sorry about that. I don't think are you hearing a loud motorcycle? So using a very loud motorcycle here. Right. Okay, that's good. All right, so I want to train ourselves to see the hijack coming. How do we train ourselves to see the hijack coming? We start allowing ourselves to spend time almost like debriefing, but we help yourself with kind of go through a debriefing process now. It helps, yeah, if you have a therapist you can talk to about this, but it also helps if you have friends, if you have family members who you can talk to. And I say this very carefully because unfortunately, not all friends and all family members will be able to help you through this in a healthy way. Some friends may want to just and in my language they say they want to wear the fighting trouser with you to go and fight with the person, right? Like my big sister, but then if I tell her anything about anybody doing anything to me, she literally wants to go and fight. So, but you need to be able to have someone or some place that allows you to reflect on this experience in a way that it doesn't stay blocked. So, after a stressful experience, take a moment this week, maybe pause for 5 minutes. Think of for yourself which of the relationships have been fired by the experience. Is there some self-related thing going on here? Is there some mistake-related thing going on there? Is there some unpredictable authority-related thing going on here? And has there been any kind of surprising trigger? Try to see if you can make connections with it. Because really what we're trying to do is the more you're making all these connections, your brain is piecing the puzzle together. And when the more it pieces the puzzles together to help you know that you are actually safe, right? You find yourself feeling a little bit stronger to deal with this manager, to kind of be around this toxic manager. So, which schema is loudest for you? Is it the schema of the relationship with yourself? And to think about this a little bit. Is it the relationship with mistakes? If you find yourself constantly worried about mistakes, having sleepless nights about mistakes, is it the relationship with unpredictable authority? So which of these do you find yourself with? Right. So as we said, this is the first in the series, and the first in the series just looking at how we can begin that process of stopping a toxic bus from targeting us. And the more you're able to understand the different things the boss might do to target you, the easier it starts becoming to actually stay out of the way of the traps that you may fall into, because you've just been avoiding and pushing down and pushing through, which has been resulting in keeping you blind. Over the next 3 more sessions, we're going to be exploring different body tools, and that's going to help you feel more stronger on an emotional level. Because we said it's not just the logic, on the emotional level too. Your nervous system is at play here, and we have to do different things to strengthen your nervous system. So once we learn certain body tools that was going to help strengthen the nervous system. And then on session 3, we're going to look at the mind training protocols that will strengthen one's mind even stronger, so that you find yourself that despite how toxic a manager might be, you know exactly the kind of things you can do for different types of toxic managers. And in this session 4, we're going to be exploring different ways of growing our internal validation system, which is extremely important, because if you can do all these 3 things, you'll find that a toxic manager will struggle to trigger you again. Yeah? Did you have something?
And I really want to add, I just think the importance, I think, just on the previous slide that you mentioned about almost like naming the trigger, I think, that awareness is really key. And I think, this, if you take nothing else away, it's just like, becoming, having that awareness, and the next time someone frustrates you, or, you feel judgment or anything like that, just kind of like say, okay, where is that really coming from? Just kind of like name it. Don't even have to like delve into that detective. Just, I think the next sessions will kind of like help you to iron that out, and just really pinpoint it. But I think that awareness is key. I think firstly, I think ultimately self-awareness, understanding who we are, and those blind spots that often take us, almost blindside us really. But yeah, I just really want to just say about the triggers, just identifying them from them, I think would be really key.
Exactly. So,
I think Abigail's got her hand up.
Abigail?
I was just thinking, it's one thing to deal with your own mistakes, but when you're dealing with an unpredictable person in authority, that is your nerve is all day on edge, because you don't know what they're coming up with. So that's why I'm here, because I know how to deal with these unpredictable people in authorities that we have to deal with on a daily basis as you go into work. Because and sometimes it's not even an authority; it might even below you.
Yeah,
That's
true.
triggering.
Exactly.
It's dealing with those.
Yeah, it could be the people definitely below you. Yes. So just as I said at the beginning, I've set up some a WhatsApp group called the Pattern Room, where I'm going to be releasing some helpful materials, things that you can use across the week. So I'm going to post the first thing tomorrow morning in there. So there's like a practical tools that you're using for each Sunday session. So for what we've covered today, you're going to have your practical tools for what you're going to be doing in that group. So what I would really hope would be that if people have different experiences as they're going through the week, you can actually discuss it in the group as well, where we can start to just support each other as we're going through different things as we go through the series today. this month. So I want to kind of thank you for joining us and for being a wonderful audience today. We're going to be moving on to the next set on Monday. I think Alfie unfortunately won't be with us next on next Sunday. However, she's planning to be with us at least on the last Sunday because she has some appointments that she's already pre-booked. But we want to kind of thank you, Althea, for really supporting us today. And thank you, Cheslin. Thank you, Abigail, for joining. Yeah. Any questions before we wrap up? Oh, Jana's to just join.
Anna Dean, that's my friend. That's my friend. She's a manager. Fire vice car.
Right, cool.
Welcome, Jana.
Welcome, Jana. I just wondered, are there any questions at all before we wrap up?
No questions for me, but I just wanted to say, I mean, it sounds like a really good program, and I would have liked to be on more often, but I have a standing appointment on Sunday evenings. I was heading there actually, and there was a fire at Hackney Downs, so unfortunately, I had to turn back. So I usually would be at choir rehearsal now.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So as I said, we have a pattern room that we have created in WhatsApp. So if you leave your phone number, I can add you to the WhatsApp group. The replay of this video of the session will be placed in that group for anybody who wants to sort of watch the replay as well. Plus, please, if you have anybody else who needs what we're doing, you can also get them to send their number. I can add them to the group. They can also watch the replay. Sorry, say again?
I said I know somebody.
You know somebody good. Cool.
Benefit, yeah.
Oh, good. Yes. So again, we know this is the very first session, and we've really just covered the key ideas that can help us really connect with how to start to see clearly the ways to avoid being targeted by a toxic manager. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Wishing you a wonderful week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.